Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
I want you to imagine right now that person or persons in your life that absolutely provoke you and trigger you. They make you feel like you just can't even. You get angry, frustrated, anxious, stressed. Maybe you even feel some hate or such strong dislike. It looks like hate in your heart for these people or this person. We probably all have this in our life. And if you really reflect on it, just think about and feel right now how maddening it is to imagine that person maybe in the same room with you or having to go to work with them or whatever it is. This is a maddening person or persons in your life. And you can't even at this point. I want you to get in that framework and just really feel what that feels like. My suspicion is it doesn't feel good. You hate feeling this way. You don't like it. In fact, I think all of us as humans go, if only this person would either be removed from my life or change in the way I need them to change, I don't have to feel this way anymore. I can finally feel good. I don't have to feel so bad and feel so awful all the time. And so your hope and your desire, our hope and our desire as humans, I feel this too, is let's try to change this outer world, these outer people, so I can finally feel good. Today we're going to continue our series where we review the book, The Tools, by Phil Stutz and Barry Michaels. This week, we want to introduce you to another tool they talk about in the book and walk through that tool and how it helps address some of the challenging people or peoples in your life.
This second tool is called Active Love, and it is a technique to get yourself out of what the book refers to as a mental maze. So as Joel mentioned, you call upon this image of a person or maybe even persons, or it could be a demographic of people that they get inside your mind and you can't get them out. Whenever you think about them, all you can think about is bad things. They really affect you and impact you and maybe even cause you to behave or create an entire world around fighting them. They don't have anything good or positive about them. Everything that you can think of as a characteristic of this person, people, or demographic of people, everything you can think about is negative. And they crawl inside your brain and you can't get them out. Or maybe your feelings about them cause a mental maze. You imagine scenarios of revenge, or you imagine scenarios of dominance over them. You imagine a world in which they don't exist. You've purged them from existence. These are all effectively forms of poison that you are taking inside of yourself. You are giving them a ton of control because they are now inside of you. They're in your brain, locked in there, and you're locked in there with them. The tool of active love is a way to navigate out of this place where somebody else or your feelings about somebody else have effectively trapped you in a place where you are in reaction to them. Trapped you in a place where you can't get out of your thought processes around them. And the only way to do it is through this idea of active love.
In the notes of the book that was on our shelf, The Tools, I've got notes in the margins of this book because I used this specific tool when I was dealing with a lot of ex-wife issues, custody issues with my kids, divorce. There was a lot of trauma, and it was a difficult situation. And I had a lot of strong feelings about the person on the other side. As you can imagine, if you've been through a difficult divorce or breakup or situation with an ex, there's a lot of stuff that comes up, and you see this other person sometimes as maddening and difficult to engage with. I would actively use this tool anytime I was preparing to engage with this person. And through practice and skill, years later now, I'm to the point where I can engage with her and I'm just very Zen-like. I'm present. I'm there. I don't get triggered anymore. I don't have all the emotional, investment and difficulties that come up because of this tool. So I can speak from firsthand experience. This is a tool and technique I personally have used in a very specific application in my life, and I believe it will be useful for you too. Some of the cues for when this tool is useful: you need to use this the moment someone does something that angers you is one of the cues. Another one could be you use it when you find yourself reliving a personal injustice, whether it was in the recent or distant past. And the third cue is you can use it to prepare yourself to confront a difficult person in your life. And that's mostly how I used it when I was going through this tool.
Now, what's interesting, and Joel just did a callback to a time period in which he was engaged with someone who he was going through a nasty battle. Now, this doesn't say anything about the other person, and it doesn't say anything about him. When we find ourselves in these situations, you could be right, wrong, wildly wrong, dead on accurate. You could be a lot of different things in your assessment of this other individual. It doesn't matter, though, because this is not really about creating any sort of evaluation of the other person. It's not trying to figure out whether or not your assessment is accurate or inaccurate. It's not an attempt to really see things through their perspective. It actually is a lot more abstract than that. It's more about recognizing the result on yourself when you allow this person to occupy mental real estate inside of you. So it's not really about putting on this idea of love to be sympathetic to the other person. It's not an idea of putting on love to be able to, really understand how you could be in the wrong. It's actually a lot less emotional than that. It's more about understanding that as long as you're in a mental maze, as long as you're trapped in this place where all you can think about is negative things whenever this individual comes up or this people group comes up potentially, when you're in that space, you are effectively handing over your power to them because they're now setting the tone. You're in reaction to them. You're allowing them to set your agenda inside of your mind. And so this is not really about being empathetic. It's not about being sympathetic. It's about understanding that there needs to be something more powerful than your sense of injustice. One of the elements that is brought up in the book is that most of the reason why we get caught up in these mental mazes is that we believe somebody has been unfair to us. And we retain this rather childlike notion that if we are good and if we act good, then the world will respond with good toward us. But that's not really how things work. Well, there is a sense that if we put good things into the world, we will most often receive good things back. That's also to some extent circumstantial. And also, it's not a one-to-one correlation. There are many times when we've behaved wonderfully that day and somebody still cuts us off in traffic or takes their day out on us, right? Because it's not just about us and what's going on for us. There are other people who are having their own days that we're interacting with. So the idea that if we do good things, then we'll always have good things back is a very unsophisticated way to see the universe. There are lots and lots of modifiers in there. So when something is unfair or unjust, we can't immediately behave as if that person is upsetting the universal order and that they should have been better to us because in unrelated experiences or events, we were good to other people. It's just a flex and flow of how things work. So the best way to get through or the other side of this narrative that even though it's childlike and unsophisticated, quite honestly, most of us carry it. I know I carry it a lot. There are a lot of times where I'm like, hey, you're not allowed to treat me that way. When it's really, I can't really control how they treat me. I can be there or not be there, but I can't really control how they treat me unless I'm going to, call it out or behave in a way that shows a more empowered stance. But simply absorbing the behavior and then going into a mental place of revenge or these fantasies about how I'm going to get them, right? Going into that mental maze is something that doesn't actually solve the situation. So the book makes a statement that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and that is the only way to get out of this idea of fairness is that we have to feel something that's bigger, better, and more powerful than that idea of fairness. There has to be something more ascended, something that's bigger than that effectively creates an access point where we no longer get trapped in this and that we can have a 180 turn of feeling and emotion.
The great thing about this book is it's in a very action framework of doing exercises, mental exercises and reframes, as well as tapping into higher principles, higher forces that are at work. And this exercise, Active Love, taps into the higher force of outflow, what the authors call outflow. And it's the infinite spiritual force that gives itself without restraint. So it's this idea of outflowing energy, active love going out from yourself, regardless of what's going on with anyone else or anything else in the world. It's that outflow, that experience of that flowing of energy from yourself. And I think that's really important to realize, is because you can't control the world, you can't control people, you can't control sometimes your own feelings and thoughts about people in the world. But you can begin to influence and take control of how you put energy into the world. I think that's why this tool is so powerful.
And just like we mentioned in the last podcast, if that sounds a little too beliefy for you, maybe a little too, I hate using the word woo-woo these days because everybody takes exception to it, but if it's a little too spiritual for your taste, I think an example of how this principle can effectively be applied to almost everyone is probably warranted. So in the book, there's this great example that one of the writers gives that they basically said they stumbled upon this concept by accident at the age of 5. There was just a fluke snowfall in Southern California where they grew up, and they were all super excited about going sledding. And he says that he was 5 years old and his father said something. He doesn't even remember what his father said, something to hurt his feelings. And this really great mood of excitement and novelty immediately got crushed by whatever his father said to hurt his feelings. And he just decided that he was going to punish everybody by not going sledding with them. And they kept trying to talk him into it. Come on, just come outside with us. Just go sledding. And he's like, nope, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. And as he had dug his heels in, he said his family had effectively almost abandoned trying to get him to do this. I guess actually they were outside. They were trying to get him into the car to go sledding, when he turned around and he saw a little puppy. And instantaneously, whatever he was feeling before was gone, because it was an adorable little puppy. He got excited. He ran over to it. He picked it up. He didn't even consider that literally 60 seconds before he had refused to get into the car to go sledding. He ran to the car, opened the door, and said, "Look, I found a puppy." And then he and his father got to work on trying to figure out who the owner of the puppy was. And they found the owner and returned the puppy to the owner. And his father said, "Hey, I'm really proud of you for, taking responsibility for this." And he said it was just it was almost like the universe was a different universe from one second to the next. Because whatever feeling he had about this puppy and about finding the puppy's owner had completely eclipsed the negative emotions he was feeling before. So that's outflow. And it's also this idea that whatever we're feeling, there's something bigger than that, something bigger, better, and more powerful. And that is the love that we feel when we recognize that life is made up of more things than just our petty experiences, or our insistence that things be fair, or people treat us in a certain way in those moments. There's something that can eclipse those moments because we've all experienced it. Everybody, I think, has had the experience of being in a really shitty mood, and then just something incidental happens that just reverses it, almost like it's just a pivot. And now we're feeling great. And we're like, oh, I don't even really remember what I was feeling bad about before. That's outflow. That's the idea of something bigger, something more powerful than whatever it is that we were feeling when we were trapped in our mental maze.
The tool exercise taps into that outflow on purpose through active love. So I'm going to go ahead and read the exercise, disembodied or disengaged from the context of the book. You should go get a copy of the tools. We'll have a link in the show notes here to get more context. Let me just go ahead and give you the active love exercise as written down in the book that you can give more context around. Imagine that you're surrounded by a warm, liquid light that is infinitely loving. Feel your heart expand far beyond you to become one with this love. As you bring your heart back to its normal size, this infinite energy concentrates itself inside your chest. It's an unstoppable, loving force that wants to give itself away. Focus on the person who's triggered your anger. If they're not physically in front of you, usually they're not, then visualize their presence. Send all the love in your chest directly to them, holding nothing back. It's like completely expelling a deep breath. Follow the love as it leaves your chest. When it enters the other person at the solar plexus, don't just watch, feel it enter. This will give you the sense you're completely at one with them. Now relax. You'll feel yourself again surrounded by infinite love. which will return to you all the energy you gave away. You'll feel filled up and at peace.
So again, this isn't about trying to get into another person's perspective. It's not about trying to find common ground. It's not an intellectual exercise. It is entirely proactive, and it's entirely emotional love blasted to the other person. So you don't have to rationalize or figure out why this person deserves this love, because it's really actually not about them. You're doing it for yourself. You are filling yourself with this emotion to free yourself from whatever influence they have on you. You're actually doing it as a form of severing of the toxicity that you believe that they're pouring into you. It's basically like a sword. It's a way to cut whatever influence they have, because you are blasting something, again, bigger, better, and more powerful onto them.
I can remember when I did this before, I almost imagined it as being an attack of love. Like I felt it as a positive attack, but like attacking the other person with this infinite love. It's like a weird way to look at it, but almost like a weapon. Like I was wielding a power, a force, and a weapon of love and this outflow. And it really works. It's so powerful. It's so weird to imagine it, to have this experience. It's such a visceral experience when you have this happen, I should say.
But it's a weapon that benefits both people. It's a weapon that raises the vibration of the entire engagement or interaction. It's probably the most powerful weapon a person can wield, because it actually creates good things as opposed to breaking them down. And it makes me think of two different things. The first one is it reminds me of, and I think we did a podcast on this before, of the 4 Greek definitions of love. I think a million years ago in our early days of podcasting, we talked about those 4 different definitions. But the Greek definitions of love are philia, storge, eros, and agape. Philia is the relationship that you have with people who are close enough to feel like family. Storge is the feelings you have actually for family. Eros is the feelings you have for your partner. And agape are the feelings that you have for people because they're people. It's a principled form of love. It's not a love that you feel based on familiarity or on a relationship that's built. It's a love that you just generally feel for all humankind. It's principled love. And this concept of active love very much makes me think of the principled love idea as well. You're blasting them not with fondness. You're blasting them not with a feeling of approval. You're blasting them with principled love, a love that you would feel because they're all part of humanity. Like they're on Spaceship Earth with us. This is our alumni. These are the people who exist on the planet at the same time that we exist, which is an absolute miracle of timelines, right? It's just so unlikely that we would be traveling the planet with all of these people, and yet here they all are. So it's a feeling of love that goes out to the individual based on the fact that they exist and nothing more. So I think it's a different way of seeing this idea of using love, of active love. But again, it's empowering to you as an individual because it severs the negativity that is being caused and created when you think about that individual. Now, what you think about when you think about that individual is the love that you're pushing out towards them. Now, there's a couple different things. Oh, that was the first thing, right? The second thing that it made me think of, why we resist things like this to begin with. There's a sense that if we blast somebody who maybe has, in an quote unquote objective sense, like, 10 out of 10 people would agree that you've been wronged by this individual. What they do or think or whatever is not okay. There's the sense that if we send love to them, we're also somehow sending like a sanctioning energy to them. Endorsement, that it's okay that they're behaving however they're behaving or did or whatever. And so we resist doing that because we think we're rewarding them. But really what we're doing is we're sending, again, it's almost like a weapon. What we're doing is we are tapping into an energy that's bigger than us, bigger than them, bigger than all of us. We're tapping into something that our ego resists because it's a more powerful energy than anything our ego can come up with. And so in some ways, we are actually losing control. We're handing ourselves over to this far greater, more powerful energy that is active or agape love. And so we resist it not because of justice. We think we're resisting it because of justice. That's the story we tell ourselves. And it's noble, right? Like the nobility is that we're going to be more in tune with this idea of fairness and justice. But the reality is that that's a noble story we've put on top of something that is effectively a fear. And the fear is that this is greater than us. But here's the secret. The secret is that the only way to tap into something that's greater than us is to tap into something that's greater than us. And that's part of the human experience, is wanting to be something greater. We want to be a part of something that's bigger than just our individual ego. And active love or agape love or tapping into this energy that has the ability to effectively sever toxicity is us being part of something bigger. And we can feel that instinctively. But the trick or the key or the secret isn't that now we hand ourselves over to a power that is, beyond us, and then now we are at its mercy. The key is that actually we're tapping into something that creates an inner state. It's called, the higher force is called outflow, but it's actually an inner state that we're experiencing. And it gives us so much more power to behave in a proactive way in the outside world, because we're not trapped in fantasy. We're not reacting to this other person. We're not effectively dancing to their fiddle because they can trigger us or get us upset. We sever all of that with this outpouring of love. And then now, because our inner state is so much more empowered and tapped into something powerful and is severing the other person's ability to jerk our chain, now we have so much more choice in how we're going to engage with them. Like you said, when you had a bad situation with an individual in the past, once you went through all of this, you got so much more zen around them. You were able to now behave towards them in a way that maybe they even deserve a little bit more. But definitely you deserve. You deserve to be able to, and I say deserve lightly because we're also talking about, whether or not anybody deserves anything. But in some ways, if you are in an empowered place, you have earned the right to be able to show up in a way that represents you at your best. If you do these exercises and take your power back, you have earned the right to be zen and to show up in a way that is better for the two of you, as opposed to just triggering and reacting and building the tension until finally maybe it turns into an all-out war. You have actually gotten to the other side of that tension, and you're in a place where there is no tension because you keep diffusing it, and now you get to show up as your best self.
How warped and jacked up is it if you in your life or I in my life use love as a reward system to endorse behavior or prevent behavior? Like, that's a pretty jacked up view of love as a transactional element, almost like an economy of love, like an economic scale of reward and all this. That is a recipe for codependence. Like, that's a pathway that will pave a road toward codependence at the end of that road. And we're talking about principled love, unconditional love, not conditional love here, and tapping into that force of outflow that puts you in that state. It doesn't necessarily mean if you do this, and you could do this with persons in your life, by the way, like an actual person. You can also do it with people groups you don't like, a political party or affiliation on the other side, quote unquote, of yourself that you don't like, or a political candidate or a position of power, a boss, maybe somebody you don't know personally, but triggers you all the same.
Yeah, religious paradigms or people who believe certain things, or somebody who you think is a people group that's taking something from you, or it just goes on and on. It can be literally anybody or any group of people.
Yeah, and when you do this, it doesn't mean those problems will cease. It doesn't mean those people won't still come at you. Quote unquote, your enemies won't just go away. We're not saying it solves the problem of your enemies directly, but what it does do is it changes your relationship to it. It changes how you see and experience these things, and it creates the opportunity for happiness and joyfulness, more importantly, in your life going forward. So this is why this exercise, I believe, can cut through all of that. And if you are seeing love as a reward system, take a real cold, hard look at that, because that is a warning sign for you. That road does not end well for you in relationships, family dynamics, children, parents, romances. Like, it is a bad road to go down if that's how you see love. And you got to get control of that and back that up quickly. Start to change your relationship. It's my opinion and my experience that will set you on the right course if you do.
You mean by reward system, you mean if you do something I like, I'll give it to you. I'll give you love. And if you do something I don't like, I'll withhold it.
Yeah, this idea of, well, if I send love to that person, like let's say there's a political person in a position of high power that you just can't stand. Your feeling might be, well, if I send that outflow of love, I'm endorsing their behavior. That's not the same. You're not endorsing behavior. And in fact, if you see an outpouring of love as endorsement, that's pretty jacked up. That's a really jacked up view of love.
Well, like you mentioned, if it's a form of currency, if you use love, giving, and withholding as a form of currency, that is the recipe for codependence. And you don't just enter codependent relationships with the people you know in your life. You can enter codependent relationships with figures that you've never met, or again, demographics of people. Demographics of people can create codependent relationships with other demographics of people. I would say that the political spectrum shows that beautifully. You've got, particularly in the country in which we live, you've got two political parties that are massively codependent on each other. So yeah, you're right. That is a way to get to that place. But on the flip side, there are three really, I would say, desirable emergence of a system that includes this node of active love. The first one is, it is a way to get self-control. If you are, again, dancing to somebody else's fiddle because they can trigger you, and just little things, like the more you get caught in this mental maze of disliking somebody, the less it takes for them to trigger you. You can get to a place where you see nothing positive about them. Literally every square inch of this person is bad, wrong, including really neutral things. And so everything about them triggers you. And when you are dealing with trigger after trigger and it just stacks up, right? These triggers just pile up to a place where you can't handle it anymore and you explode. Well, if you want to remove that capacity the other person has to get you to a place of exploding, and by the way, I see this play out constantly on social media. You can tell that people have such hair triggers. Tiny little things seem to be brushing up against clearly wide open wounds of raw nerves just waiting to be breathed on and having the person just lose their mind. That person, those individuals, that place or position lacks self-control. You don't have the capacity to show up in a proactive or even responsive way. You don't have the capacity to say, you know what, I think I'm going to sit this one out, if you are so inflamed that you have to let the other person know how wrong they are. So the first thing that you get as a benefit to this is self-control. The second thing you get is assertiveness. As Joel mentioned, the active love exercise or tool or technique helps in the past, present, and future. It helps overwrite past wrongs or injustices. It allows you to deal with moments in which you are feeling angered by a situation you're experiencing. And it also helps you figure out how you're going to handle potential conflict in the future. Somebody who you run into that this is not going to turn out well. It gives you assertiveness in those moments when you are feeling triggered in that moment, the anger that you feel, but it also helps you determine how you're going to engage with somebody that you know that this is going to have inevitable conflict, or you suspect will have a creation of inevitable conflict. If you have this ability to go zen, if you have the ability to blast this active love at the person and sever their control over you, then you have the capacity to show up as your best self and state the things you need to state, because you're not simply in a mudslinging contest anymore. You're not in a place where you have to have the high ground or you have to show them moral superiority because they're clearly in the wrong. You let go of all of those agendas. It's more about handling the situation as it is. So it gives you a capacity to choose your words more carefully, to be more thoughtful, to not be just emotionally jerked around, but actually be in a place where you can communicate ideas far more clearly.
When you are in an active frame, you are by definition not reactive to things outside of yourself. You are more in the driver's seat, driving the action forward.
And the third thing you get is acceptance of other people. And as anybody will tell you, the lack of accepting other people's faults and imperfections and weaknesses and challenges is effectively an inability to accept oneself in all of those ways. We are usually the most triggered when we're seeing something outside of ourselves that is reflecting back something our ego is contending with. And so the capacity to accept others ends up mirroring our ability to accept ourselves. One way that we can blast active love and start this process is by blasting it onto ourselves and the things inside of ourselves that we have a hard time accepting, the parts of ourselves that we've demonized. So this idea of acceptance and acknowledging that all humans are imperfect. We know that conceptually. We say it all the time. Nobody's perfect. And yet we behave in a way that when somebody isn't perfect or isn't making the mark the way that we think they should, we think that now that individual is persona non grata and we got to go after them. We do the same thing to ourselves. So what's so beautiful about the active love technique is that within it is not just woven in an ability to deal with other people, but it's also an ability to deal with and accept our own limitations. So it's a really powerful way to have just a general sense of inner peace.
So the specific technique is called active love. It comes from the book, The Tools by Phil Stutz and Barry Michaels. We'll put a link in the show notes. You've been listening along. What's coming up for you? Have you had this experience of outflow, of active love in your life, where you felt better about the love you were expressing, maybe the agape or principled love you were expressing for someone or someones, plural? We want you to come over to personalityhacker.com, directly below this show. Ask a question, leave a comment. More importantly, share your story. We want to hear from you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Leave a rating and review for us on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. We have a book out. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And we have been ad-free for 6 years, but the way that we help subsidize the podcast is by people investing in us and in themselves with our personal growth programs. So if you're interested in taking your personal development to the next level, head on over to personalityhacker.com. Under our catalog is our suite of programs, and you might find one that's tailored just for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.